Well, welcome back, everybody. My name is Gail Carpenter, and in today's video, I'm going to be talking to you about milk quality, specifically at the herd level, as well as the individual goat level. I want to start with a little bit of background about what exactly I mean when I say SCC. SCC stands for somatic cell count. Now, somatic cell literally means body cell, so normally we think about this as white blood cells, and so these would be the cells of the immune system that are going to be fighting infection. So when a goat has an infection in the mammary gland, we expect to see higher white blood cell count and therefore higher somatic cell count. However, technically, somatic cells are any cell that has a nucleus. And so in the goat in particular, they tend to shed a lot of their epithelial cells or their actual mammary cells into the milk in their process of producing milk. So somatic cell counts in the goat are going to be elevated compared to what we see in the cow, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the goat has a clinical or subclinical infection. SCC is still a really useful metric, though, when we're talking about milk quality and other health, because it can help us flag cows that have potentially, they're fighting off an infection or they have some sort of pathogen that they're dealing with. So what's different about goats? Well, like I said, generally these goats are going to have a higher somatic cell count compared to our bovines or even our sheep. But just because they have a higher somatic cell count doesn't necessarily mean that these somatic cells are white blood cells. So these goats may still be healthy even with a somewhat elevated somatic cell count. Somatic cell count is really important because they are an indicator of subclinical mastitis. That would be mastitis that doesn't have clinical symptoms. So we might not see abnormal milk or any sort of physical indication that the goat has an infection, but she may still have a subclinical infection that we can't necessarily see with our eyes. Clinical mastitis is relatively uncommon in goats, but subclinical mastitis is relatively common in goats. So we might have a producer tell us that, they don't have a mastitis issue in their herd, when in fact that they have a lot of subclinical issues. They just aren't testing for it, so they don't know. So what level should we be shooting for with somatic cell count? Well, there's two sides of this. There's first, what is legal with somatic cell count? So legally, 1.5 million is the upper maximum based on the pasteurized milk ordinance here in the USA. And generally speaking, 1 million is going to be the legal upper limit for grade A milk, so milk that you sell for fluid consumption. Now, that's a different question than what you might be targeting for somatic cell count. Just because it's legal doesn't necessarily mean it's good or what we're targeting. Anytime we have elevated somatic cell count, this represents lost milk income. So if we have goats that have a subclinical infection, we might have issues with them not producing as much as they normally would, or they're not as healthy as they normally would be, or thrifty as they normally would be. You can also check with your creamery if you're selling your milk to a creamery. A lot of times creameries will have an incentive level for a lower somatic cell count, where if you hit these targets, you actually get a higher price for your milk. So that being said, that 1 million is kind of our legal upper limit for grade A milk. Levels of less than a million are very achievable for goat dairies. And some dairies have even reported getting close to dairy cow levels with somatic cell count. So just because we do often see higher levels of somatic cell count in goats doesn't mean that we can't achieve low levels. So monitoring SCC is a useful tool for many goat dairies. So you can do this at the bulk tank level. If you're selling your milk to a creamery, they're probably going to be testing you at a bulk tank level. And so you would know in aggregate how your goat herd is performing. This is going to give you herd level information, but it can be very biased by very high somatic cell count animals. So if you see goats in the 3, 4, 5 million somatic cell count, which to our dairy cow people, that might seem incredibly high, but it does happen in the goat world. These very high somatic cell count individuals can throw off your bulk tank significantly, especially if you're milking with a smaller herd. You can also do a monthly DHI test. DHI is Dairy Herd Improvement Association. So you can DHI test on a goat dairy just like you would on a dairy cow dairy. We recommend every 30 days to kind of help you gather information on an individual goat level. Lab tests are also available if you want to do it on individuals. But a California mastitis test is a very useful tool. It's very cheap and cost effective and easy to use once you've learned how to use it. And this is a great way to get some individual goat level data for somatic cell count. So finally, I want to give you some tips for the best milk quality in your herd. first, we want to avoid contamination in the pen. So we want to make sure those goats are housed in a clean and dry environment. We want to make sure there's no manure contamination or dirt contamination anywhere around that teat end where those pathogens could get up inside the udder. We also want to make sure that we're using best practices in the parlor or wherever we're milking our goats. It's not necessarily in the parlor for everybody. Some of you may be milking your goats into a bucket, for example. But best milking practices are going to be a good starting place for your best milk quality. So regardless of where you're milking your goats, we want to make sure that we have clean udders as well as clean hands. If you're using gloves, you want to make sure those gloves are clean. Just because you're wearing gloves doesn't mean that they aren't also contaminated or dirty. So if your gloves get dirty or ripped, change those out frequently. You want to use different dip cups for pre-dip and post-dip. So your pre-dip is going to be contaminated a lot of times if your udders are dirty when they come in. So using a different dip cup for your post-dip is going to be a great way, a simple way to keep those teats clean. And you want to also have calm and stress-free doe handling. This helps with optimal milk letdown. This makes sure that they are letting down their milk fully and completely and quickly, which is good for overall udder health. You also want to monitor the milking equipment. So in general, we think that goats should take 5 to 10 minutes to milk out. You're going to see some exceptions to this rule, but that's a good rule of thumb, 5 to 10 minutes. If they're milking out in less than 5 minutes or more than 10 minutes, you might have an issue with either milk letdown or your milking equipment. You don't want to hear a lot of squawking on that vacuum. If you're milking with a vacuum, you don't want to hear a squawking sound coming from most of your goats, meaning that the air is entering that inflation as the milking machine is pumping. So if you hear occasionally maybe one goat squawks more than some of the others, that might just be her. But if you have a lot of goats that are consistently squawking, you might need new inflations or you might need to check your fit. And also, inflation should be changed routinely, and this should be done based on the number of milkings, not a specific period of time. So check with your manufacturer's information on your inflations. It's also helpful to have feed available after milking. So if you have fresh feed available, those goats are going to get up and go to the feed and stand eating for a little while before they go rest. And that gives the teat end a chance to close after the milking routine is done. And you also want to make sure that the milk is chilled quickly. So you want to make sure that it's brought down to a temperature where it's not going to be promoting bacterial growth quickly. And this can be especially tricky if you have large volumes of milk. So the larger the volume of milk that you have, the harder it is to cool. So depending on how much milk you're making and how many goats you're milking, you may want to find some creative ways to handle that.